All right, so here's what we're looking at with this US presidential election and how it might shake up the relationship between the UK and the US. It's honestly one of the most pivotal elections in recent memory, and yeah, the outcome will start coming in early on Wednesday morning. We're talking about a choice that will shape U.K.U.S.U.S. relations for years, especially with the UK. Now, under its first Labour government in 14 years, led by Keir Starmer, yeah, there's definitely a lot at stake here. So let's dive into what each scenario could look like. On the one hand, we have a potential Kamala Harris presidency. Now, if she wins, things would be a bit more straightforward and probably smoother for the UK. This would mean a predictable alliance where Starmer and his team could expect a familiar style of diplomacy and policy. On the other hand, if Donald Trump wins, well, that's a whole other story. A second Trump administration would bring a level of unpredictability and volatility. The Labour government has to be ready for either outcome, and they've clearly been preparing. Politics. Okay, so politically speaking, a Trump win would be awkward for Starmer and his Labour government. Why? Well, the Labour Party has close connections to the U.S. Democrats, which could create tension with a Trump-led U.S. administration. Actually, things are already a bit heated. Just last month, Trump's campaign accused the Labour Party of interfering in the U.S. election after it came out that about 100 Labour staffers, past and present, were going to the U.S. to campaign for Harris. Right, you can see how that might not sit well with Trump's team. Now, Starmer has tried to play it smart here, working to create some distance between his role as Labour leader and his role as Prime Minister. Yeah, he's been pretty intentional about not getting too cozy with the Democrats in an official capacity. In fact, Starmer was among the few world leaders who actually spoke to Trump directly after Trump survived an assassination attempt. They even had a 2-hour dinner in New York back in September, which, yeah, shows Starmer is putting in the effort to maintain a diplomatic relationship. However, Starmer hasn't yet managed to meet Harris, though their political alignment is a lot closer. You've got key Labour aides like Morgan McSweeney and Deborah Mattinson attending the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Right? So you can see the natural connection there, but it's all about careful maneuvering to keep relations balanced, you know? Security and defense. All right, now here's where things get really interesting: security and defense. The difference between Harris and Trump on these issues? Yeah, it's pretty stark. If Harris wins, it would probably mean continuity, especially on topics like NATO and Ukraine. Harris has been a vocal critic of Vladimir Putin, and her running mate, Tim Walz, he's the governor of Minnesota, has shown strong support for Ukraine. Shortly after Russia's major invasion, Walz even ordered state agencies to cut ties with Russian contracts, which speaks volumes about his stance. Now, if Trump wins, it could shake up NATO, and that's a big deal for the UK and for European security. Trump has a history of criticizing NATO and has even suggested the US might leave the alliance. Why? He wants other countries to shoulder more of the defense costs, something he's been vocal about. Trump's approach to Ukraine has also been pretty controversial. He's criticized U.S. support for Ukraine's defense and has put pressure on Ukraine's president, Zelensky, to negotiate with Russia. Trump has also claimed he could end the war within a day, though, a quick resolution that favors Putin could be risky for Europe. Yeah, it's definitely a high-stakes situation. Climate and environment. Okay, moving on to climate and environmental policy, and this is where we see a major difference. For Starmer, climate change is a big focus, right? He even emphasized this in his first speech to other world leaders at the UN General Assembly. And next week, he'll be speaking again at the COP29 summit, positioning his government as a leader in global climate efforts. If Harris wins, she'd be a strong ally on this front. Starmer and Harris would likely work together to advance climate initiatives and policies to limit global warming, which, yeah, is obviously a key priority right now. However, a Trump win would be, not great for the climate agenda. In fact, it could throw any chance of limiting global heating to safer levels into a tailspin. Trump has been more focused on deregulation and bolstering traditional energy industries, which doesn't exactly align with Starmer's environmental goals. There's also the issue of U.S.U.K. trade, especially when it comes to agriculture. Both Trump and Biden in the past have insisted that agriculture must be a core part of any post-Brexit trade deal, but the British public has voiced strong opposition to chlorinated chicken and hormone-treated beef from the U.S. That could be a tricky area for Starmer if Trump pushes for agricultural concessions in a trade agreement. trade. Now, speaking of trade, let's look at the bigger picture. It's been nearly 5 years since Brexit, but the prospect of a U.S.-U.K. trade deal is still, pretty remote. Back in 2023, then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak actually acknowledged that a trade deal wasn't really a priority for either country, and not much has changed on that front, honestly. The Democrats and Republicans both lean toward protectionist economic policies these days, which doesn't exactly bode well for a free trade agreement with the UK. Labour's hopes for a deal face a challenging landscape. Both U.S. parties are focused on appealing to voters in battleground states in the Rust Belt, where deindustrialization has hit hard. The economic strategies being shaped here are increasingly inward-focused. Under a second Trump presidency, we'd likely see an even more protectionist approach. Trump has floated the idea of imposing tariffs across the board, like a 10% tariff on all goods imported to the U.S. and a whopping 100% tariff on imported vehicles. Yeah, that would be a huge blow for UK exporters, especially those in the automotive industry. Now, Harris isn't nearly as aggressive when it comes to tariffs, but it's still unlikely that she would prioritize a trade agreement with the UK over domestic concerns. Summing it up. So, there you have it. We've got two very different paths for U.K.-U.S.U.S. relations depending on the outcome of this election. With Harris, the UK would likely enjoy a smoother, more predictable alliance, especially on defense, climate, and political alignment. Starmer would have an ally he could work with closely on shared priorities like NATO, climate change, and, well, even some areas of trade. But with Trump, we're looking at a very different picture: more tension, more unpredictability, and yeah, definitely more challenges. A Trump win would mean a bumpier ride for the Labour government, with potential strains on NATO, clashes over climate policies, and serious obstacles in the way of trade negotiations. Starmer would have to tread carefully to maintain stability and cooperation. This election, yeah, it's a big deal. The results on Wednesday could set the tone for the next chapter in U.K.-U.S.U.S. relations, shaping everything from defense and trade to environmental policy and diplomacy. So let's keep an eye out for those results as they start coming in, because whatever happens, it's going to impact the global stage in a major way.